Hello and welcome to another episode of the Simple Path to Wellbeing podcast. My name is Paul Garrigan. So today I want to talk about how insight into emptiness frees the imagination. And this to me is important because I think a lack of understanding of emptiness can mean we don't really get the benefits of the imagination or of what's possible, how much it could actually revolutionize our lives. And also, there's a danger that if we don't understand the emptiness of perception, that we will cling to things that arise in the imagination in a way that can be unhealthy and unhelpful. So it's almost like this understanding into emptiness helps us be safe while using the imagination and puts us in a position where it really can change everything for us. Like we can all be trapped in this box, very, very rigid box of perceiving life in a certain way. And emptiness provides the key to escaping that. Now, emptiness is very much associated with Buddhism. And I recommend teachers like Rob Burbea, who explore this topic, in his book, Seeing That Frees. It's a very good book on the topic. But emptiness is something I think we can all come to through exploring our experience. And meditation can be very helpful for this. I mean, my own journey very much involved Vipassana meditation. See, believing in this kind of stuff is one thing. But we need to really see it and understand it, because the thing that's holding our perception prisoner is very, very strong. It's very, very powerful. So we need powerful insight to be able to get beyond it, to be able to escape our shackles. And the poet, William Blake, the mystical poet and artist William Blake, he once described it as mind-forged manacles. That it's like we're held prisoner by our own mind. And the reason why that is so is that we take our way of perceiving as real, as it being how things are. And what insight into emptiness is this understanding at a deep, deep level. It has to be at a deep, deep level that it changes us. But this understanding that we're not seeing what's real, we're seeing an interpretation. And that's really what emptiness is. My favourite way of explaining emptiness is to say to people that the dreamer creates the dream, and the dream creates the dreamer. And because of that, both are empty. So what that means is we are not seeing reality as a solid thing that everyone sees. That we're always seeing our interpretation of what we call reality. And we could say that our interpretation is our reality, but it's not something objective that everyone experiences. And that reality is created by certain thoughts, certain conditioning, our interpretation of experience, all of that. And it's actually a dance that we're not seeing objects out there cleanly, that we're always interpreting them, and that's what makes these interpretations empty, because there isn't the right way of interpreting. There isn't if you meet somebody and you see them a certain way. I mean, there will be lots of reasons why you will see them that way or experience them that way, and it will actually have very little to do with that person. And somebody else will come along and see that person very differently, and somebody else will come along and see them differently again. And you say, which of those perceptions is real? Who saw the real person? And you might say, well, it's the person themselves. But again, that's just another perspective. And you start to see that all there are in regards to everything is interpretations. And all of those interpretations are different. And because of that, it means they're empty. Because there isn't, you cannot say that one of them is the right one. One of the things I got interested in Buddhism in my early teenage years, and one of the things that troubled me, or kind of niggled at me, or caused doubt in me, was this idea that the Buddha woke up from being deluded, that he awoke. He realized he was deluded and he awoke, which, was very liberating to hear. But it also troubled me because I kind of had this sense that, well, hold on a second. If you've been deluded in the past and you acknowledge you've been deluded in the past, I mean, what's to say you're not being deluded again? I mean, what's to say it's not just a fancier delusion? What's just to say that, this, whatever we end up at as the ultimate, it's just that basically it's such a convincing delusion that there's no way we can see beyond it. So this idea that we can wake up to the truth of what's there, to me is very suspicious. But over the years, I came to the understanding that that's not what the Buddha was saying. He didn't wake up from delusion, that he woke up to delusion. And my sense of it is, and I could be wrong, but this is what I've worked with and what I've found helpful, is that there is no real way or true way of perceiving. That we would never be able to tell, because our mind is always interpreting, and it's always going to be an interpretation. And the idea isn't to get the true interpretation or the right interpretation, it's to get the one that's most skillful. Because, of course, the danger here is that if we say that all the different perceptions are kind of equal, in that they're all perceptions, all the different ones, well, that kind of leads easily to relativism, where everything's, my opinion is just the same as your facts or whatever. But that's not really what it's saying. What it's saying is, and what's very, very obvious, is that some ways of perceiving are more skillful than others. Some ways of perceiving lead to less suffering than others. And if our goal is to suffer less, which is the goal of paths like Buddhism, and it certainly was my own goal, well then it's obvious that some ways of perceiving are not going to work for us. And so it's all about getting ways of perceiving that do help us, that do lead us to our goal. And this understanding of insight allows that to happen, because otherwise what happens, because we were convinced that the way we usually experience, it's like we have this inner conviction that that's just how things are. So if everything appears to us as really negative, if everything appears to us as really bleak and meaningless and all of that, it just seems, well, that's how it is. And this kind of lack of insight into emptiness means we don't see that, well, that's just a perception, and it's not, it's not the truth. It's just a way of looking, and not a very skillful one, and not a very helpful one. And if you were to come along and say, well, I want to have the true way of perceiving, the right way of perceiving, the one that's ultimately true, well, I don't even know how you would begin at that. Because even something like mindfulness is just another way of perceiving, a more skillful way of perceiving. And that's why I've mentioned in earlier, podcasts, I'm not that interested in true, because to me, it ultimately, what's ultimately true, because to me, it's unknowable. And that fact that it is unknowable gives us this incredible freedom. And part of the freedom is when you start to realize that we have this ability to perceive the world in endless ways. And the key to our happiness, the key to ending suffering, is learning to perceive in ways that nurture us, ways of perceiving that allows us to fully appreciate this life. See, it's not about living in Gaga land or living in dreamland. Like when you understand, because that would be the objection. You know, if you start to experience life in a more friendly way, someone could come along and say, well, you're just in Gaga land, you're not experiencing the real reality. But when you understand emptiness, you see, well, there is no real reality. There's only different ways of perceiving, and they're all valid. In that you cannot choose one as the right one. And it's so, there is no right, we cannot change what's arising in experience. But interpretation is completely up for grabs. And the problem is, and our problem, I think, as humans always has been, is that we're too focused on what's arising when the real problem is how we're interpreting what's arising. And what's arising is kind of irrelevant without that interpretation. It's always this dance between the two. One is completely dependent on the other. And it's kind of realizing the part where we can have an influence that's important, which is in the interpretation. So this is where imagination comes in. Imagination is what allows us to break free of our normal way of perceiving and lead us into completely different ways of perceiving. Now, I think it's important here to mention something that the romantic poet William Coleridge said when he differentiated between fancy and imagination. I think most of us engage in what he would call fancy, this old word, fancy. And what that means is that really what we call imagination is just our normal perception, kind of distorted in a very limited way. It's like we're still in a box, but we're moving things around inside that box. Where real imagination is getting outside our normal perception. It's getting outside that box. It's bringing in something that we'd normally not be able to have as an option. And this is where I found, stuff working with things that come up in dreams or hypnagogic imagery. That imagery where that will come up in meditation. I mean, sometimes those images that come up in meditation, if you're doing something like Vipassana, the goal is to just, observe them and without any kind of attachment, just kind of, just let them come and let them go. But I found there is a time and place for actually working with those images. And it's not about becoming obsessed with them or anything like that. But just that sometimes, and in a very, very powerful way, they can introduce something that completely alters our perception, completely alters our way of perceiving. And I've discussed this before, about how an image, I remember once having this image of a warrior or a hunter, and how that really helped me see things in a very, very different way when I was struggling financially. These things, when we couple them with the understanding of emptiness, see, without that understanding, these images can come and they don't really have much power to change us because we just assume, well, I'm just the way I am. I could never do that because I'm this way. Like I'm too meek to ever think of myself in terms of being a hunter. But when you understand that, that really there's no right way for you to perceive, it's just your habitual way, which has nothing to do with who you are, it's to do with your habits, that we can change and we can start to see things in incredibly different ways and experience life in incredibly different ways. And we can start to, and this freedom to move between different ways of perceiving fills the world with wonder. It becomes this incredible opportunity where every single moment there's this opportunity to relate to it in a skillful way by coming at it with a the right perception, or the more skillful perception. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. If you've any questions or anything you'd like me to go further into, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'll leave my information, I always do, underneath. And thanks very much for listening. And goodbye.